Hey everybody, welcome to Midweek Live. I'm Sam, I'm one of the pastors here. I'm sitting here in my backyard, hanging out for a little bit. Hopefully the mosquitoes stay away. We did a little bit of work with that, try and make it so that that's not the case. All sprayed up and stuff, and hopefully we can not be like swatting all over the place tonight. Looking forward to hanging out with you guys for a little bit tonight, and I'll give you guys a minute or two as we have you guys come onto the live, and I'll just review a couple of things. First and foremost, say hi. I'd love to see you guys, so if you're here, make sure you guys say hi and say where you're at, maybe if you're on your deck as well, or if you're hanging in the living room or wherever it is. I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Also, what I want you to know is that tonight we're going to be going over the sermon a little bit. We'll review what Mike said this Sunday, but then in addition to that, we're going to go quite a bit more in detail with a particular thing that he mentioned this weekend. He mentioned some verses and some things that Paul said about evil and suffering and kind of the stuff that he dealt with and how he was dealing with it. So we're going to go into that, and my hope for the night is that as we're having this time together, what you'll be able to do and what you'll be able to walk out of this with is the ability to see how the Bible can transform your understanding and your view of what evil and suffering is, but then also not just what it is, but how to deal with it, how to live with it, how to walk through it, how to get to the other side of things as far as evil and suffering is concerned. If you had a question, if there's something that was really meaningful and impactful to you when you were watching the sermon or listening to the sermon this weekend, write that down, send it out and say that was the case. That would be awesome to hear from each other, the kinds of things that you found impactful while you were watching the sermon this weekend. Additionally, if there's something that's been kind of eating at you, a question that you might have, or as we're going through some things, if there's a question that came to mind as you were there, I'd love to hear what those questions might be. So jot them down. I might not be able to mention them or answer them in the moment, but I'll do my best to get back to them at least at the end of tonight's talk. Hi Joanne, hi Sherry, hi Phil. I see a couple of you guys on here. Make sure you guys say hi when you jump on. I would love to see you guys. I'd love for you to see what you guys want to say. But again, tell me something that was meaningful to you when you were watching this weekend or listening to the sermon. Maybe mention a question that came up, or even as we're going through things, mention the question, and we'll kind of have a conversation here. It'll be super fun. Really quickly, I want to just overview the kinds of things that Pastor Mike talked about this weekend, because I think he did such an awesome job addressing this topic and giving us some hope and some insight and some positivity, and just a great way to look at evil and suffering. He talked about how God is not the creator of evil or suffering. Like, God didn't show up one day and be like, oh, evil and suffering, there you go. That's not something that he created. Hey John, nice to see you. He didn't do that, but in addition to that, the reason that the majority of the evil and suffering is in the world is this: God gave us free choice. And God gave us the freedom to be able to decide things and make decisions for ourselves. And he gave us free will. And because of that, evil and suffering came in because we chose to break this relationship with God. And then in addition to that, as we had free will, the question kind of comes up, well, why did God give us free will in the first place? Like, why did he want us to make decisions? Well, the biggest reason, and Mike mentioned this, is that real love isn't love without the ability to choose it. Real love is not love without the ability for us to say, I can actually choose to love God back. So I think that's a really awesome thing, but it also shows us why evil is in the world. So much evil. I think Mike mentioned like 90% of all evil would go away if we just chose to stop sinning. Like, if sin all went away, like, there would be so much less suffering and evil in the world. Now, other thing that he brought up, a couple of quick things that I want to mention is God restrains evil. Like, there could be so much more evil, but because of our prayers, because of our efforts in the world, because of the things that we're doing with God and serving and loving each other, and also the ways that God himself actually restrains evil in the world, it's not as much as it could be. And also that what we experience now will pale in comparison to the amazingness, the incredibleness that we will experience one day. And so while this might seem like one day out of the year, we have 364 times a million more days of goodness in God's kingdom and the kingdom of heaven and heaven after this. And that's something to be excited about. Jesus is evidence of this. He takes this most evil thing, this most evil situation of his death and his burial in a grave, and he brings the most possible good out of it by literally being raised to life and showing us that that's what will happen to us, and showing us our forgiveness and our freedom and all this amazing stuff. And out of the worst, most awful situation in the history of the world, Jesus, God's own son, dying on a cross, we get the best thing. So out of evil comes goodness. Jesus is evidence that by grace and resurrection, it turns evil into good. And that's something that we can do with God. We can be actually part of this goodness happening. So that's a quick overview of Pastor Mike's sermon. I know there's so much more that he mentioned, and there's so much good stuff, but I want to get to one particular thing that he mentioned tonight. And I really, he mentioned it, and I was reminded of just how good this particular set of verses are that Paul writes. He writes about his own experience and this really crazy set of things that happened to him. And so here Paul is, and he's writing in the book of 2 Corinthians, and this is where he does a large part of this as he's writing. And he talks about how awful his experiences have been. Like, he had experienced some just bad stuff. Like, to even think about having to experience what he experienced is just wretched. He starts out the letter, just a few verses in, he says, in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, 8 through 11, he says this. He says, "We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. But as a result, we were stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God, who raised the dead. And he did rescue us from mortal danger, and he will rescue us again. We have placed our confidence in him, and he will continue to rescue us. And you are helping us by praying for us. Then many people will give thanks because God has graciously answered so many prayers for our safety." So he begins here, and we're going to get a little further in just a minute or two, but he begins here by saying, like, hey, I've experienced some stuff. Like, so much so that I've actually experienced some, like, really deadly stuff. Like, I was on the verge of death. And I wonder how many of us have had an experience where we feel like life's just treating us pretty awfully. Like, we've gotten to a point where things are not good, and we're struggling, and we're having a pretty awful go at it. And we can look back and say, hey, that situation was just bad. Because, like Paul acknowledges, like, sometimes life deals us some pretty awful punches. There's some moments in life where things are just ugly. I mean, right now, the world itself is kind of turned topsy-turvy more than I've ever experienced it. And so when you think about evil and suffering, it's just rampant. It's there. It's everywhere. And Paul says, hey, I've been there. I've experienced that. I've experienced this evil and the suffering. I was on the verge of death. And personally, knowing that he's experienced that, it says a lot. It makes a difference in my faith. Maybe yours too. I don't know about you, but for you, possibly knowing that Paul and Jesus and the disciples have gone through really difficult times, it's good. Because we know that their faith wasn't there just because they had a really lovely life. In fact, their faith was there and it thrived in spite of and maybe was even strengthened because of the evil and the suffering they experienced in their life. It's not to say that evil and suffering is good. It's not. It sucks. It's awful. And yet, there can be good that can come out of it. God can use it. So Paul, he keeps going. He talks about a bunch of stuff, but he comes back to this theme all the way in chapter 11. And so he picks up on this again. I'm gonna read this longer stretch here, but it's verse 11, 16 through 33, or chapter 11, 16 through 33, and it's pretty wild what he's saying. So just to give you a little bit of context, there are these other disciples and supposed apostles who are just basically trying to pull the wool over the eyes of other people. Like, they're trying to get people to pay for them to come and speak and preach in this way that's really not healthy. They're not really talking about the stuff that matters the most. And so Paul's like calling them out. He's saying, hey guys, these people that are like trying to tell you that they're the ones that you should be following, yeah, they're not the real deal. And let me tell you why. So he's saying some crazy stuff. And that's the context. Have a listen. It's 2 Corinthians 11, 16 through 33 if you want to follow along. This is what it says. It says, again I say, don't think that I am a fool to talk like this. But even if you do, listen to me, as you would to a foolish person or a crazy person, kind of is what he's saying, while I also boast a little. Such boasting is not from the Lord, but I am acting like a fool or a crazy person. So Paul's acknowledging he's crazy. And since others boast about their human achievements, I will too. After all, you think you are so wise, but you enjoy putting up with fools. You put up with it when someone enslaves you, takes everything you have, takes advantage of you, takes control of everything, and slaps you in the face. Sounds pretty awful. I'm ashamed to say that we've been too weak. To do that. But whatever they dare to boast about, these other apostles, the other teachers that Paul is referring to, I'm talking like a fool again. I dare to boast about it too. You get the sense that Paul's really sarcastic here. Like, he's laying it on thick. Okay, but whatever they dare to boast about, I'm talking like a fool again. I dare to boast about it too. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I know I sound like a madman, but I have served him far more. I have worked harder, been put in prison more often, been whipped times without number, and faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. A quick point here. They gave 39 lashes because on the 40th one, people thought they would die. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a day adrift at sea. I have traveled on many long journeys. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I have faced dangers in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas. And I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I have worked hard and long, endured many sleepless nights. I have been hungry and thirsty and have often gone without food. I've shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. He's experienced some really rough situations. Then, besides all this, I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak without my feeling that weakness? Who is led astray and I do not burn with anger? If I must boast, I would rather boast about the things that show how weak I am. God the Father of our Lord Jesus, who is worthy of eternal praise, knows I am not lying. When I was in Damascus, the governor under King Aretas kept guards at the city gate to catch me. I had to be lowered in a basket through a window in the city wall to escape from him. Whew! I know that was a lot. That was a long one, but think about it. As you listen to those things, this guy endured some grueling, difficult situations. The 39 lashes with a whip, they literally thought the 40th one, that would kill a person, so they stopped at 39. So he was on the verge of death time and time again. But there's this thing that he says. There's this thing that he says that I think many of us have maybe experienced. Some of us maybe without even realizing it. Paul makes this point, and we'll make it even further in just a minute. He makes this point that God works in his weakness. It's in his weakness that he's going to boast. There's a point to that. There's a reason for that. I don't know about you, but in my moments of weakness, when I'm struggling to achieve something, for me, like on a weekly basis, if I'm at a point where I'm trying to figure out what to say in a sermon, and I'm literally like, hey, it's the day before, and what I got is not cutting it, and it'll be in that moment where I realize, oh, I've been trying real hard to do this on all of my own strength. I've been trying to do this and do it my way, and it's most of the time when I'm like, okay, tried. Hey God, I could use some help. That he shows, but that's a petty example. But there are other times when you find yourself at your most vulnerable, when you find yourself at your weakest, and you're willing to allow God to work in and through you in maybe some tough and hard and refining ways, that things change, that you grow, that you shift, that you begin to see this power at work in you. It's this soft but incredible power that changes you and it shifts you. It makes you into a different person. It literally transforms you. I think there's something incredible there, that in this weakness that we have, that's when God shows up. When we experience evil and suffering, and we realize that we don't have the power to overcome it on our own, and we then are willing to allow God to work in those situations and open ourselves up to it, this is when God begins to be powerful in our life. It's when we see him be powerful in our lives. Paul, he's very explicit about this. In 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, he says this. He says, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God, he talks about this amazing vision that God had given to him. So to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud. So people talk about back pain, a bunch of different things. They're not sure exactly what this thorn is. But he's got this thing that's basically pain and suffering all the time. 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. As we finish out here, again, I'll say, if you have any questions, something you struggle with evil and suffering, and you want to just throw it out there, we've got a couple minutes left before I'm going to sign off here for the night, especially because of the fact that I think the rain's coming here soon. But if you have anything that you want to ask, I welcome those questions. But as I read those verses, as Paul says, or Jesus says, it's actually in red in Roman or in 2 Corinthians. It says, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness." That's what Jesus says to Paul. I don't know all the reasons for evil and suffering in the world. I know sin is a tremendous part of it. I don't know. Oh, I will drop those verses. Yes. I don't know what the deal is with that. I wish I had a better answer for evil and suffering, for like why it exists. I know a lot of it does have to do with our ability to choose. However, I know God can use it. I know that when we stop trying to be proud and achieve things on our own power and ability, and we allow God to work in us and refine us in those times of difficulty and hardship and struggles, And when we open ourselves up to learning more about who God is, who we are, how we can relate to him, how we can have a relationship with him, and how he can grow us and be strong in us and through us during those times, I know God is powerful. I know God uses the evil. I know God transforms the evil from something ugly to something good. And sometimes there's not even answers. Ken, great point. You've been taught that evil comes from the devil's influence on our free choice. I think that there's some validity to that. I mean, if you look back at the Old Testament and early Genesis, you would see the story talking about how the tempter, which is Satan in that story, through the snake, he tempts and influences the free choice. And I think certainly evil is magnified by that. However, I don't always think that we need, I think that was like the starting of a perpetual motion machine, right? I get kick-started it, and we're perfectly capable now of choosing the evil, selfish things in the future. So I think the devil certainly is part of it, and he kick-started it, but I think we're also selfish people, and we don't always need to be pushed in that direction. So I don't think we can blame all evil on the devil's influencing our choices. I think that we have to be careful not to say that it always is, but I think he certainly plays a role in it. I think sometimes we have to be careful not to say that the devil made me do it. But yes, great comment, and definitely had a huge impact in exactly that. All right, we're getting close on time. So I so appreciate you guys. If you guys want to send me an email with other questions, samprowitz@redpinchurch.com. I'll do the verses and my email address in the comments. That would be great. So you guys can reference those things. But the last thing that I'll say with this whole bit is, like I was saying before, evil and suffering are a real and difficult thing. And we're just always dealing with it. I don't have perfect answers. Someday this will be something I can't wait to ask God for why it existed and how it existed, for all the details. But I know with certainty that, like Paul says, God's power works best in our weakness. And when we're open to that, willing to listen to that, and we allow God's power to work in us, I think there's some really amazing things that can happen. I think God can work through us, and I think we can bring glory to God, and I think we can actually experience more meaningful, purposeful lives because we're not trying to do it all on our own and not trying to give ourselves all the credit. Okay, so many things. I'm so grateful for all of you guys tuning in and for all of you who tune in at a later date. And with that, I'm going to say a prayer to end our time tonight and try and skedaddle inside before the rain starts. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for the comments, and thanks for being in here. All right, would you guys pray with me? God, thank you for this night. Thank you for the fact that you work best in our weakness. Sometimes it's hard to get to that place willingly. Most of the time we don't get there willingly. But when we're there, God, and when we are in our weakness, we ask that we would be willing to watch you show up, willing to accept you showing up, and willing to then do the difficult work of allowing you to work in us, allowing you to work on us, to change us, to shape us, to work through us, to show up in ways that are so obviously you. We pray that you would bless this night and bless what we've learned tonight. Help us to live differently because of it. Live knowing that you show up in those moments, and that it's not about us being these amazing people. It's about you working through us and us being on the same team as you, working for your glory. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So good to see so many of you, Natasha, Angie, John, Philip. It's great to see you guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I can't wait to chat with you guys someday in person. It's going to be a beautiful day, and I can't wait for then. So with that, I'll finish it out. Have a great night, y'all.